Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Couple of Nukes. As always, I'm your host, Mr. Whiskey. And what is life other than a course of one step after the other? As it is often said in our society, it starts with the first step. But what after that? Now, what I'm trying to say is we are constantly taking steps, sometimes one at a time, sometimes we walk two steps at a time. But it's important for us to think about those steps. And I say that all in a play on words for today's guest, who is the Executive Director of STEPS Ministry. And we're going to get into what the word STEPS means to him and to the people he works with and the lives he has changed. That's what we're here to do, is change lives. We're here to fight behavioral disorders, trauma, and everything else in life that tries to bog us down. There's nothing that the enemy likes more than stopping our steps, stopping us right in our tracks, and having us take steps backward. That's the direction he wants us to go. So we are here with Mr. Steve Ward. Would you please go ahead and introduce yourself for us?
It's a pleasure to be here. What a great intro. And as you can
Thank you.
guess, we named our nonprofit STEPS that for a reason. And so there are multiple reasons that we can get into over the course of our conversation, but it's a pleasure to be here. I love the irony of someone who is an alcoholic having a friendly conversation with Mr. Whiskey, because I had a few too many friendly conversations with Mr. Whiskey over my years, but it's all
Yeah,
good. But
yeah,
it's a pleasure to be here.
yeah, for sure. So let's go backwards, take some steps backward to your origin story before we get to the Steps Ministry, who you were, and you've already mentioned some battles right there. So let's get into that.
Yeah. Well, depends on who you ask. If you ask most people around me for most of my life, I look like I pretty much had everything together. I was in business for a long time. I was actually with one company. I was with IBM for 38 years. I'd like to say I was very successful in that regard, and I was a husband and a father, and everything on the outside seemed to be going well. But I was a high functioning alcoholic that hid it extremely well, as alcoholics and addicts are very good to do.
Right. Yeah.
And so when I say high functioning alcoholic, that doesn't mean I was less than one. It just meant I was one of those people who could keep it compartmentalized so that it didn't wreck my
Right.
entire life. But it's still an addiction. It's still an idol that had more control over me than I did over it. And so I was able to compartmentalize that. And part of the methodology that helped me do that was that my favorite drinking buddy was my wife, who who
Mm.
had who turned out in later years had an alcohol issue as well. And then our two sons, who, I think we'd done the very best that we could. I think we'd done a good job raising them, but they had two different personalities. And when our older son hit middle school, moving toward high school, he chose to hang around a crowd that was making some bad decisions. And so he went down a path for a good number of years that was very, very dark, involving alcohol and drugs. So I'll close up this segment by saying, back in what I refer to as the dark ages, three out of four of my immediate family were struggling with substances, and we also therefore dealt with mental health issues like depression and the marriage issues and financial issues that such chaos brings into any family. So those were the dark ages, but as God is very creative about doing, they led to better times.
Amen for sure. And ladies and gentlemen who are watching, I know Mr. Ward is an older gentleman, but he doesn't mean the actual Dark Ages. Just want to clarify that. He's not that old. But yeah, I agree. It can be my father is high functioning as well, actually working security jobs, armed security, and
Yeah,
people, wouldn't know. And you talk about compartmentalizing it, and yeah, it can go undetected for a long time, both from other people
yeah,
and yourself as well. I mean, it takes a while to even recognize that, especially when you are, like you said, when you feel like you have everything together, you're doing your job. As long as it's not hindering you, why would it
yeah,
be a problem? So I understand
yeah.
that. And I mean, what exactly was the wake up call kind of moment? Whether that was God induced or you kind of had something happen where you're like, I
Yeah,
need a change. I mean, what was that
yeah.
moment for y'all?
Well, it's a good question because I tend to intentionally use the word high functioning alcoholic now because a lot of people I'm talking to, that's a wake up call to them, right?
Right.
Because they think if they're doing well in their job and in life in general, that means they don't have a problem. But no, that's not the case. Many of them are alcoholics as well. They've just never stopped to really count the cost of what they're doing.
Yeah.
For me, it was two or three, it was a convergence of two or three things that hit me, when I was in my late 40s. One was I was trained as an industrial engineer, right? So I went to Georgia Tech and I just started thinking about the efficiency and the effectiveness of my life, right? In other words, yeah, I did good at work. I was okay as a dad and a husband, but I was just wasting so much of my energy and my capacity, every time I got home from work. So I started thinking about that. I started thinking about, am I really having more of an impact on perhaps other people and perhaps my family than I think that there is? And that started being a consideration that I wanted to think about. I also started looking ahead, right? And I thought, do I want to get to the end of my life and look back and think, wow, Steve, you did a pretty good job on some things and you kept a good buzz most of your life. Do I want that to be my legacy? And that thought frightened me, that would be my legacy. But as you mentioned or implied, the spiritual journey is part of everything we do in life. And certainly whether
Amen.
it's the good things or the bad things. And I actually found God, or God found me at a later age. I was 40 when I went to an event, and God just took over my life. But this is a testament to how insidious addiction is and how clever the enemy is on using it. Is I went a number of years after that, and I was so cleverly compartmentalizing and rationalizing my choices. I became active in the church. I was working with nonprofits. I was doing ministry all over the place. And at the same time, I was able to rationalize to myself that this area of disobedience or this idol in my life was somehow not a very big deal. Well, God in his patience allowed me to coexist that way, but eventually he presented me with the conclusion that it is a big deal. And so it hit me that I have to either make a choice about this idol in my life and let go of it, or have to intentionally face the fact that I'm making a decision to choose the person that I declare to be God. So those things kind of converged. It wasn't I didn't hit bottom, right? I didn't I didn't have a DUI or was thrown in jail or get fired or have a divorce. But those things were a very big deal to me, right? To say, what's my legacy in life? How am I living my life? Am I making an impact on others? And am I doing what God wants me to do? And I came to the conclusion there was no choice anymore. I had to stop. You know.
Right. Can I fully be a vessel that God can use to its maximum capacity to reach others, to help others, if I am hindered in any way? I completely agree with that. And like you said, it's so sneaky because we already mentioned high functioning, and it's interesting that people will say, all right, as long as I'm doing good at work, as long as my marriage is working, as long as my kids still love me, it's fine. All while your health could be deteriorating on the inside. It's interesting how we'll prioritize those factors and not our
Yeah,
health. We're just saying,
yeah,
well, I'm sure I could just stop and my body will heal, or, my kidneys will fix themselves out. But my marriage, on the other hand, I mean, phew, I can't lose that. I could lose a kidney or two, maybe, but it's interesting how we rationalize things. And you mentioned, justification and excuses. And we've talked before on the show, in fact, with Andrew Houghton, who runs the Extraordinary Men's Network, we were talking about his journey with alcohol as well as my father's, and hey, it's my son's birthday today, so I'm gonna have a drink, or today's, this and that, and it gets down to you can find a justification for every day of the week pretty much. Or, my father would say, well, it's just White Claw, not a sponsor, but it's White Claw, and so it's not as bad if I have 10 of those, if I have one bottle of vodka. And it's like, we can come up with these crazy justifications, and the enemy definitely does like making us feel justified, making us feel like it's all right. And a lot of, I'm not here to preach too much, but what I will say is a lot of people who are faith based, and if you're listening to this and you're one of those people saying, well, alcohol isn't a sin, that's true. However, I always refer back to Galatians chapter 5, where it says excessive drunkenness is in Paul's list. And when we all know who Paul is when he wrote those fiery letters, right? He included that. And I also want to go to I came across this in Proverbs just a few weeks ago. Proverbs chapter 20, verse 1. It says, "Wine is a mocker and beer a brawler. Whoever is led astray," key part there, led astray by them is not wise. Right? So it doesn't say, drinking wine and beer is bad. Being led astray is a different thing. And that might not show right away. But like we said, if drinking is hindering your ability to be the best person you can be the best servant for God, then it is. And so, like you said, you were still even going to church and running a nonprofit while drinking.
Yeah.
And it's hard for people to detect and see that. And so, since we mentioned the nonprofit, let's get a little bit into that. STEPS Ministries, is that an acronym? Is it just, STEPS as in, where does that come from? Where does this all play into your recovery?
Yeah. If it's okay, let me tell you how STEPS came to be, and then
For
I'll
sure.
explain what the acronym means and so forth. First off, that stage I was referring to very earlier, I was very engaged working with nonprofits, but I had not started STEPS yet. So after all those ages, when I went through, again, I used the nickname Dark Ages. So I appreciate you clearing for people that I'm not literally hundreds of years old. Yeah. So, but I found myself in a period of life, right, where I was engaged in recovery for myself as a person, as a husband, and as a spouse. And if people haven't been engaged in recovery, they don't know what it's all about, because I
Right.
actually found it fascinating. Because over a relatively short period of time, less than a year, I had three epiphanies that kind of changed the direction of my life, right? The first was that some of the world's worst problems, which I would suggest that substance abuse and mental health issues are in that category. Some of the world's worst problems are extremely treatable. There are tens of millions of people who've gotten better. They just
Right.
normally don't run around talking about it very much, right? So a lot of people don't know that. Secondly, I learned not only are they treatable, in many cases, they're preventable. And the way to prevent them is by learning to live life the right way. That means emotionally, mentally, spiritually, socially. I mean, God designed us as holistic, integrated people. And when we choose flawed mechanisms to get through life, then we will inevitably be taking steps in the wrong direction. But if we learn to live life the right way, then we can, in many cases, avoid going down the paths that lead to those deep issues. The third epiphany was, well, my recovery plan of choice was something called Celebrate Recovery, which happens to be a Christian 12-step program. My wife went to AA, which is also based on the 12 steps. And I saw these things in recovery called the 12 steps, and I thought, well, I'll be darned, those look a lot like the Bible to me, which in effect they are. So I
Right.
put these three things together to said some of the world's worst problems are treatable. In many cases, they're preventable. The way we prevent them is to live life the right way, and that includes living life the way that God designed it to be. So the question then, I guess, changed the trajectory of my life was thought, why don't we teach this to everyone? Why don't we wait until people crash and burn and have them go through 2 years of recovery? That makes no sense. Why don't parents raise their kids this way to equip them for real life? Why don't
Mm.
we teach this in middle school and in high school and in college? Why don't companies use real life one-on-one principles in their professional development programs? So I went looking for books on where do people take this spiritual, recovery based, emotionally and mentally sound principles that you find in recovery, and where do people show how they live real life that way? And I didn't really find a lot. So I wrote a book. And I didn't know I was supposed to write a book until I wrote a book. So it happens to be laying here. It's called Steps, a Daily Journey to a Better Life. And it's not really about addiction or recovery. It's about how do you use those proven principles to live life better? So that's what kind of changed the trajectory. I'm still working full time with IBM at the time, but the process of writing the book and starting a blog and seeing the fulfillment of, like you, Mr. Whiskey, of communicating to people in a
Right.
way that hopefully can help them make choices to live life better. That was very fulfilling. So I kind of plotted my exit strategy from the business world, and then 6.5 years ago, I left to found STEPS Ministries. And I can talk more about that in a minute, but you've asked about steps. So steps does actually have multiple reasons to it. One is in the world of recovery, the concept of taking small steps to change your life is very, very important.
Right.
Because you ask an alcoholic or a user, hey, you've been doing this for 30 years. We want you to stop for the rest of your life. That's hard for them.
Right.
But to
Yeah.
say, hey, what about do it for one day? Do it a day at a time. By the way, a lot of what our nonprofit does is we research recovery, biblical principles, psychology, neuroscience, wellness, personal development, and we integrate those things that have been proven to work for large amounts of people from those areas. And this concept that you can change your life by taking small steps is one of the most well validated, evidence informed, and evidence based life improvement tips in the world. It's just true. So the word steps means that. Um, it also means when I wrote the book, I took the 12 steps that many people in recovery are familiar with, and I condensed it to an easier to kind of deal with set of 5 steps. And I use the word steps as an acronym for that. So the S in STEPS stands for surrender, which is kind of steps 1, 2, and 3 from the 12 steps, which is
Right.
I'll accept that life is out of control and that I need to surrender it to my higher power, which happens to be God. The T in STEPS is for transformation, which from the world of recovery is steps 4, 5, 6, and 7, which is I'll accept that I have issues in my life, but that there are things that I can do to get better about them. If I develop my self awareness and my humility and take steps in the right direction. The E in steps is for empathy, which it means it steps kind of 8 and 9, which in the world of recovery is you'll get your relationships in place, right? You'll forgive those who need forgiving and you'll make amends with those.
Right.
So the way in which we relate to people is indicative of what's going on inside of us. So that's what we talk about there. The next last letter, the P, is for progress, which is steps 10 and 11, which says you need to have daily habits or weekly disciplines that keep you along the right track emotionally and spiritually and from a recovery standpoint. And then the final S is for service, which at the end of the 12 steps, it says, now that we have been changed by the spiritual transformation we've gone through in this process, we want to take this message to others. So one of the really, really cool things about recovery is a lot of people come out of it and are so grateful and humble for the changes they've gone through that they really want to take that message to other people and help other people. So that's where the word and the acronym STEPS came from, and it kind of lines up with why I do what I do now. Yeah, because I'm grateful, and it breaks my heart that there are so many people out there who don't know what they don't know, and either they are just missing something big in their life and they don't quite know what it is they're missing, or they're making a series of choices that are increasingly bringing pain into the lives of themselves and their family, and they don't know what to do about it. Yeah. So,
Yeah, so if I'm
yeah.
tracking correctly, you saw that everything done in recovery, well, if we had just done it beforehand, we probably wouldn't have gone through all that and needed recovery. So you said instead of looking at everything as casualty response, let's look at it as preventative, actions to take. And so you created this program. So what exactly does STEPS Ministry do? We know it's a nonprofit, but what does it do? Who does it serve?
Yeah. Um, I do speak and teach in person, but primarily what we're trying to do is to create online and digital content, whether it be articles, videos. Um, we do create podcasts like vehicles, ebooks, online courses. Our website has hundreds of articles on all these topics we're talking about. Create digital content to reach people wherever they are, however they like to consume content. One of the reasons for that is, you know, about 1 out of 7 people is struggling from a substance abuse family or from a substance abuse problem. And if you
Right.
look at families, about half of families have someone who has a mental health or a substance problem. Half of families. I'll say that. I know I'm repeating it for the third time. Half of families, nuclear
Right.
families, right? Not extended families. So of the people listening, if it's not you, it's the guy or gal next to you. In other words, it's
Yeah.
that prevalent. And but there are things that we can. But the problem is, 90% of those people aren't getting help. they're not seeing a counselor. They're not talking to their pastor. They're not going to a recovery meeting.
Right.
They're not in a program. They're not even telling their friends about it. They're keeping it secret and they're hiding
Yeah.
it, and they're in this downward spiral of darkness. So we figure if we can make helpful resources very, very available, so anyone can use them in the convenience of their home or on their cell phone, and also confidential, right? A lot of people don't. They're fearful to be seen in a recovery meeting, but maybe they'll sit at home on their laptop or use their phone, and they'll like the latest online course we just put out is all about recovery. If you've never been exposed to the world of recovery, what's it like?
Right.
We have courses for dealing with anxiety, with other aspects of mental health, with just living life better, being more intentional, improving your relationships, and hopefully more people will get access to that content if it's available to them digitally. So that's what we do. We reach out to parents and families a lot. As you called out, we are really focused on prevention, trying to get ahead of things. So the best way to do that is to reach kids or teenagers, and the best way to do that is hopefully through their parents. About 9 out of 10 people who wind up with a substance problem start using before the age of 18. So if you can work through their parents to do that. So we do a lot with parents or any organization that supports families. We do a lot with any organization that wants to provide education and services to their employees or their members or the members of their congregation. Um, you know, we do offer things for people who have already figured out that they have an issue, some kind of an addictive problem, so they kind of want to more directly get to, okay, now what do I do about it? So we do that, but mostly it's the common denominator is somebody who, for themselves or someone they're close to, cares enough about themselves or that person to want them to get the most out of life. And that means to live life the way it was designed and also to prevent huge self-destructive habits from coming into our lives.
Yeah, for sure. And if someone is interested in working with your nonprofit or donating money or something else or just getting in contact with you, would you say your website is a perfect spot for them to reach out to you?
It's a great place to start. It's lifeimprovementsteps.com. Again, lifeimprovementsteps.com. There's a contact us button. So if you want to send an email and find out more, we'll be glad to get back to you. There is a donate page. We are a 501c3 nonprofit. There's also access to a lot of these resources. So hopefully they can be helpful to many of you. But a great place to start, as always, at lifeimprovementsteps.com. I'd suggest you sign up for the blog. The blog is just a weekly value added kind of a message that helps you live life better. Right now, we're actually, as we speak, putting a new set of resources in place for anyone dealing with behavioral health problems, and that includes substances or mental health. So pretty soon, the opt-in page where you can get started on that will be www.thenextrightsteps.com/steps-workbook. Again, that's www.thenextrightsteps.com/steps-workbook. But so those are all good places. But again, our website's lifeimprovementsteps.com, and I really hope that it's helpful for you and people you know. So
Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, we'll add that in the description below. So whether you want to sign up for the blog, donate, or just take a look at those resources and maybe share them with someone who needs them, that's a great opportunity to do so. And Mr. Ward, I'd love for you to, before we sign off here, to share with us a Bible quote that really has helped you through your times or you think can really help people who are listening right now, whether that's recovery related or not.
well, like I said, there's a lot. Um, I'll pick one that I'll say is closest to me because it's most visible to me. And it's one that a lot of even non-Christians know, so
Mm,
that they'll be familiar with it, but they may misuse it or misunderstand it. So I'll mention it, and then I'll kind of describe it a little bit. It says, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Well, a lot of people who are figuring out what faith is all about get excited about that, right? They
right,
say,
right.
okay, wow, I can do anything now, right? I now have this new strength so that nothing's going to go wrong in my life and all that kind of stuff. But if you go into what Paul was talking about in Philippians, that's Philippians 4:13, by the way. And if you get into the essence of what faith is all about, it's really talking about, and this is a paradox, and Jesus was really good at presenting paradoxes to us, that we are strongest when we are at our weakest point. Okay, that doesn't sound right, right? But spiritually, it's true.
Right.
In other words, and I hope this is encouraging to anyone who's struggling, who feels down or broken or hurt or discouraged or hopeless or addicted. Whatever you're feeling, amazingly, you might be exactly where you're supposed to be, because you may now be at a point where you feel like you're at your weakest, but where you finally decide, okay, now's the time I'm going to rely on God's strength. That's really where the miracle happens spiritually. And, when we let go of ourselves and accept God for being God, and, with humble gratefulness, let his strength get us through the life, through the rest of our lives. So I'll pick that one with some explanation that went along with it. So,
No, I appreciate that. Like you said, there's a lot of people who will twist a word, and that's definitely one that even non-believers will know. That's one of the most common ones we hear, and it can be very encouraging, but it can
yeah,
be very misleading as well. So
yeah,
it's important to remember that with great faith comes great responsibility, so to speak. That we are called to live to a higher standard, and that that strength is meant for good, not evil, and it's
yeah,
not an invulnerability and a pass to do whatever we want in life. So I agree, and I think it's so important for everyone in recovery or going through hard times to, like you said, at their weakest, be their strongest. And I think sometimes being ultimately weak is great because you surrender everything to the Lord and you can find out how He will direct your steps in life. So it's definitely a great thing. But Mr. Ward, I really appreciate you coming on the show and sharing about S.T.E.P.S Ministries and your personal story there. I think it's something that a lot of us can relate to, and I completely agree with you. There's so much that can be done preventative. We always focus on afterward, but there's so much education that should be put out beforehand to prevent these poor choices from being made, or kind of limit what effect and reach they have once it begins. So I really appreciate what you do, and especially for helping out the youth.
okay. My pleasure. Thank you for having me. I enjoyed it.
Sailing through the ocean blue, nuclear reactors my crew, guiding the ship, the stars as our guide, through the waves we ride. Jokes and laughter fill the air, on this voyage we have to share, working together, side by side, as one family we will abide. In the heart of the ship we reside, nuclear operators with pride, powering the vessel with every stride. Our mission, the source of great pride.